A paralyzed $4 billion CEO had given up all hope after 17 world-renowned doctors failed to cure her. But when a poor, exhausted, single-dad delivery driver walked into her office, he stopped, looked at her legs for exactly 8 seconds, and whispered a terrifying medical secret that changed her life forever. Before we reveal how this poor delivery man did what $17 million doctors couldn't, tell me what state or country you are watching from in the comments below. Your comment helps this story reach more people. Fallon ruled a $4 billion financial empire from the top floor of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Chicago. She was brilliant, ruthless, and terrifyingly precise. But for the last 20 years, the most powerful woman in the city had been completely confined to a high-tech titanium wheelchair. A devastating car accident at age 18 had paralyzed her from the waist down. She had spent millions of dollars consulting 17 of the most renowned neurologists in the world. Every single one of them had looked at her scans, shaken their heads, and given her the exact same heartbreaking verdict: you will never walk again. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. Inside her immaculate, temperature-controlled office, Fallon sat motionless in her chair, her face a cold, unreadable mask. Standing beside her was Thorne, her senior advisor, and the man who essentially ran the physical operations of the company. Thorne was currently droning on about quarterly profit margins, holding a silver pen and speaking with the slick, arrogant confidence of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. The heavy mahogany doors of the office suddenly pushed open. A man stepped inside holding a heavy, sealed priority freight box. It was Kael. He wore a faded, rain-soaked delivery uniform and worn-out work boots that left faint, damp marks on the pristine marble floor. He was breathing heavily, his broad shoulders rising and falling. The building's freight elevator had broken down, and Kael had just carried the 50-pound box up 4 flights of stairs because he couldn't afford to be late. He had a 7-year-old daughter, Elin, waiting for him at an after-school care program that charged by the minute, and he barely had enough in his checking account to cover the week's groceries. Thorne stopped speaking immediately, his face twisting into an ugly sneer of pure disgust. "What is the meaning of this?" Thorne snapped, stepping forward.
"Delivery personnel are strictly forbidden on the executive floor. Leave the package with the receptionist and get your muddy boots out of this office immediately." Fallon didn't say a word. She simply watched the delivery man, expecting him to apologize, drop the box, and run away terrified like everyone else did. But Kael didn't apologize. He didn't even look at Thorne. Instead, Kael's sharp, deeply intelligent eyes locked onto Fallon. Or rather, they locked onto her right leg, which was resting on the metal footplate of her wheelchair. Kael stood completely frozen. He didn't blink. He just stared at her foot for exactly 8 seconds. "Did you hear me, trash?" Thorne barked, his face turning red with anger as he marched toward Kael. "I will have you fired before you reach the lobby." "Your right calf muscle," Kael said. His voice was incredibly low, calm, and carried a strange, undeniable authority that instantly sucked the air out of the massive room. He finally lifted his eyes from her leg and looked directly into Fallon's shocked face. "Your right calf muscle just exhibited a microscopic fascial spasm," Kael continued, taking one slow step closer, completely ignoring Thorne's furious presence. "The toes on your right foot are curled with residual tension, fighting against the footplate." Fallon's breath hitched in her throat. Her hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her usual cold CEO armor cracking for the first time in a decade. "I'm talking about the fact that 17 doctors lied to you," Kael said quietly,
his eyes filled with a profound, piercing understanding. Someone with true spinal cord paralysis never has that reflex. Your spine isn't broken, miss. Your brain is just terrified. The heavy, solid gold fountain pen in Fallon's hand slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. Behind her, Thorne went absolutely pale.
The arrogant advisor's eyes widened, not just in shock, but in sudden, pure panic. Because the poor, dirty delivery man standing in front of them had just exposed a multi-million-dollar lie that Thorne had spent 15 years burying. That night, surrounded by the silent, suffocating luxury of her sprawling mansion, Fallon could not sleep. Kael's words echoed in the dark room like a haunting melody. Someone with true spinal paralysis never has that reflex. For 20 years, she had accepted her fate. But now, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing into a terrifying, undeniable hope. At 2 a.m., she bypassed Thorne entirely and called an elite private investigator she kept on a secure retainer. "Find everything you can on the delivery driver who came to my office today," she ordered. His name tag said Kael. The investigator called back the very next morning. The heavy hesitation in his voice told Fallon that what he had found was highly unusual. "Miss Fallon," the investigator began carefully, "the man who delivered your package isn't just a driver. His full name is Dr. Kael Vance. 3 years ago, he was the chief of neurology at the National Medical Institute. He was a prodigy. He authored textbooks on nerve regeneration that your own doctors probably studied." Fallon's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her phone. Why is a world-class neurologist delivering packages? "His wife passed away from aggressive cancer 3 years ago," the investigator explained softly. "Before she died, he promised her that their daughter, Elin, wouldn't grow up in an empty house with a ghost for a father. The hospital demanded 80-hour work weeks. So Dr. Vance walked into the board of directors, handed over his white coat, and walked away from a multi-million-dollar medical career. He took a delivery job just so he could be there to pick his little girl up from school every single day at 3 p.m. Tears violently pricked the corners of Fallon's eyes. She had spent her entire life surrounded by greedy executives who would sell their own families for a promotion or a bonus. Yet here was a man who had thrown away the absolute pinnacle of success just to be a good father. 2 hours later, Fallon's armored black Maybach slowly pulled into a rundown, low-income apartment complex on the edge of the city. The heavy door of the luxury car opened. Her driver helped her into her wheelchair, and Fallon rolled herself toward the cracked concrete steps of the apartment building. There, sitting quietly on the steps in his faded uniform, was Kael. He had a needle and thread in his large, calloused hands, patiently and carefully sewing up a torn strap on a little girl's bright pink backpack. Fallon watched him for a long moment. The contrast was absolutely heartbreaking. The brilliant hands that had once performed life-saving brain surgeries were now rough, bruised, and quietly fixing a cheap $10 backpack for his child. Kael looked up, entirely unsurprised to see her. "You shouldn't be in this neighborhood, Miss Fallon. It's not safe." "You're a doctor," Fallon said, her voice trembling slightly, stripping away all her terrifying CEO armor. "You are the best in the country. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm not a doctor anymore," Kael replied softly, tying off the thread and setting the small backpack aside. "I'm just a dad." Fallon wheeled herself closer, looking up at him with a raw desperation she hadn't felt in 20 years. 17 doctors looked at my scans. They all took my money and said it was hopeless.
But you looked at me for 8 seconds and saw something they didn't. Please, Kael. I have all the money in the world, but I am so incredibly trapped. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Can I walk again? Kael looked at the powerful, broken woman in front of him. He thought about the medical files, the fascial spasms, and the strange, undeniable panic he had seen in her advisor's eyes yesterday. Money isn't going to fix this, Fallon, Kael said quietly, looking deep into her eyes. Because the problem isn't in your spine. Your legs aren't broken. But someone has been lying to you for a very long time.
For the next 3 weeks, Fallon's life split into 2 entirely different worlds. By day, she remained the cold, untouchable CEO of Vanguard Financial, sitting frozen in her wheelchair, while Thorne hovered nearby, eagerly managing the company's multi-billion-dollar assets. But by night, her armored Maybach secretly parked outside Kael's modest, drafty apartment. Inside his small living room, lit by a cheap floor lamp, Kael didn't treat her like a billionaire. He treated her like a human being in pain. After running a series of specialized neurological reflex tests, Kael finally sat down across from her. Functional neurological disorder, Kael said quietly, looking at the test results. FND. Your spine healed completely 19 years ago, Fallon. But your brain experienced a psychological trauma so massive, so devastating, that it created a software glitch. It literally locked the connection to your legs to protect you from the pain. You are not paralyzed by your body. You are paralyzed by your guilt. Fallon's breath caught in her throat. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white. For 20 years, she had buried the truth behind a wall of corporate ruthlessness and billions of dollars. But looking into Kael's profoundly empathetic eyes, the ice finally cracked. I was driving, Fallon whispered, her voice breaking into a ragged, helpless sob. I was 18. It was raining. The car spun out of control, and my best friend died in the passenger seat. I lived. She didn't. How am I supposed to walk the earth when she never gets to take another step? Tears streamed down the billionaire's face, stripping away every ounce of her terrifying power. She wasn't the Iron Lady of Chicago. She was just a broken 18-year-old girl trapped in a 32-year-old woman's body, punishing herself for surviving. Kael didn't offer empty medical platitudes. He leaned forward and gently took her shaking hands in his rough, calloused ones. I lost my wife to a disease I was supposed to be an expert in, he said, his voice thick with his own grief. I understand the weight of surviving, but punishing yourself won't bring her back, Fallon. It's time to forgive that 18-year-old girl. Just then, the bedroom door creaked open. Little Elin walked out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She saw the powerful CEO crying. Without a word of hesitation, the 7-year-old girl walked over, climbed onto the footplate of the titanium wheelchair, and wrapped her small, warm arms around Fallon's neck. It's okay, Elin whispered, resting her head against Fallon's shoulder. My daddy fixes broken things. He can fix you. Fallon closed her eyes, overwhelmed by a pure, unconditional warmth she hadn't felt in decades. And in that exact moment of profound emotional release, something impossible happened. Inside Fallon's designer shoe, her right big toe twitched. The recovery was agonizingly slow, built on sweat, tears, and Kael's unwavering patience. But as Fallon slowly began to regain sensation in her legs, her mind also regained its terrifying, razor-sharp clarity. If she only had FND,
Why had 17 world-renowned doctors told her she was permanently paralyzed? The answer was hidden in the corporate archives. Using her elite private investigators, Fallon quietly bypassed Thorne's security protocols and dug into her own medical records from 15 years ago. What she found made her blood run absolutely cold. 15 years ago, a brilliant young specialist had indeed diagnosed her with FND, but that medical report never reached Fallon. The documents showed a massive, untraceable wire transfer of $2 million to an offshore account linked to that doctor. The transfer was authorized by Thorne. Thorne had paid to bury the diagnosis. He had deliberately kept Fallon trapped in a wheelchair, chemically sedated by unnecessary medications, and psychologically broken so she would rely entirely on him. While she was paralyzed by grief, Thorne had been quietly embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from Vanguard Financial. But Thorne was a predator who knew when his prey was waking up. He noticed Fallon's changing demeanor. He noticed the armored Maybach's altered mileage logs. And when he discovered that Kael Vance, the brilliant former neurologist, was the one treating her, Thorne struck back with vicious, calculated cruelty. It started on a Thursday. Kael arrived at the delivery depot only to be met by his manager, who handed him a termination notice. "Corporate orders from our top investors," the manager mumbled, unable to look Kael in the eye. 2 hours later, a knock echoed at Kael's apartment door. It wasn't Fallon. It was 2 agents from Child Protective Services, flanked by a police officer. "Mr. Vance," the lead agent said coldly, "we received an anonymous, highly detailed tip from a corporate entity. The tip alleges that you are unemployed, mentally unstable, and living in unsafe conditions. We are here to temporarily remove Elin from your custody, pending a full federal investigation." Kael froze. The blood drained from his face. Thorne wasn't just trying to protect his embezzlement scheme. He was weaponizing a father's deepest terror. He was trying to take Elin. Kael's hands curled into fists, every instinct of a desperate father screaming at him to fight the officers. But he knew if he fought, he would lose his daughter forever. As the agents stepped into the apartment, Elin hid behind Kael's leg, trembling in fear. Kael looked down at his phone. He had only one option left. He dialed Fallon's private number. Miles away, in her penthouse office, Fallon listened to Kael's desperate, quiet voice, explaining what Thorne had just done. She hung up the phone. She looked across the room at Thorne, who was standing by the window, smiling smugly as he prepared the final paperwork to declare the CEO medically unfit and seize total control of Vanguard Financial. Thorne thought he had won. He thought he had broken the delivery man and caged the CEO. He had no idea that the Iron Lady had just shattered her chains, and she was about to burn his entire world to the ground. The atmosphere inside the Vanguard Financial boardroom was thick with calculated greed. Thorne stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking down at the 12 billionaire board members. In front of him lay the official declaration of medical incompetency. "It is with a heavy heart," Thorne lied smoothly, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, "that I must inform the board of Miss Fallon's rapid psychological and physical decline. She's no longer fit to run this $4 billion empire. For the stability of Vanguard, I will be stepping in as interim CEO, effective immediately." He reached into his tailored suit, pulled out his expensive gold fountain pen, and prepared to sign the final transfer of power. But before the pen could touch the paper, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom violently swung open. Thorne looked up, an arrogant demand for security already forming on his lips. But the words died instantly in his throat. The gold pen slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the polished wood. Fallon wasn't in her high-tech titanium wheelchair. She was standing. Her posture was flawless, her spine perfectly straight, radiating the terrifying absolute authority of the Iron Lady. She took one slow, deliberate step into the boardroom, then another. Her legs trembled slightly, but she walked with the undeniable power of a woman who had just conquered a 20-year prison. Right behind her stood Kael, wearing a crisp, dark suit, holding little Elin's hand. "Security!" Thorne shrieked, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. His entire empire was collapsing before his eyes. "Get them out! She's mentally unstable!" "The only thing unstable in this room," Fallon said, her voice echoing like a whip crack, "is your future." She reached her desk, picked up a thick leather folder, and threw it aggressively across the table. It slid to a stop right in front of the horrified board members.
That is the original medical report from 15 years ago, diagnosing me with functional neurological disorder, Fallon announced coldly. Next to it are the bank records showing a $2 million offshore wire transfer authorized by Thorne to bury that diagnosis. He kept me heavily medicated and trapped in a wheelchair so he could quietly embezzle hundreds of millions from this very company. The boardroom erupted into chaos. The executives stared at Thorne with absolute disgust. Thorne scrambled backward, looking for an exit. "You can't do this. I built this company with you. And that delivery man, he's losing his daughter to Child Protective Services today." Fallon smiled, a lethal, freezing smile. "My team of corporate lawyers intercepted CPS an hour ago. They also handed over your IP address, proving you fabricated the anonymous tip to terrorize a child." The boardroom doors opened one last time. 2 federal agents stepped inside with handcuffs, walking straight toward the ruined advisor. Thorne was dragged out of the room, his arrogant legacy entirely destroyed. 6 months later, the cold glass fortress of Vanguard Financial looked different. Fallon didn't just reclaim her empire, she reshaped it. She used her massive wealth to establish a cutting-edge neurological research foundation, completely dedicated to patients suffering from psychological trauma and FND. She named it in honor of Kael's late wife. She didn't offer Kael money to thank him. She offered him the position of chief medical director. It was a role that demanded his brilliant mind, but came with one absolute, non-negotiable contract clause. He would never work past 2:30 p.m., ensuring he would always be waiting at the school gates for Elin. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in the city park. Fallon, walking smoothly and confidently without any assistance, held a bright pink balloon. Little Elin was running ahead, chasing a butterfly, her laughter echoing through the trees. Kael walked beside Fallon, watching his daughter with profound peace. Fallon looked at the brilliant doctor who had thrown away everything to be a good father. He hadn't just fixed the broken signals in her brain. He had given her a family. And as Kael reached out and gently intertwined his fingers with hers, Fallon realized that after 20 years of being paralyzed by her past, she was finally ready to walk into her future. In a world obsessed with expensive solutions and prestigious titles, we often forget that the most profound healing doesn't come from a prescription pad. It comes from genuine attention. 17 world-renowned doctors looked at Fallon's bank account, but only Kael, a delivery man who had lost everything,
took the time to actually look at her pain. Thorn kept her in a wheelchair to control her wealth, but Kael helped her stand up by freeing her soul from a 20-year prison of guilt. Kael's story proves that giving up a prestigious career to be a loving father isn't a step backward. It is the ultimate measure of a man's heart. Sometimes the body freezes because the soul is bleeding. And the greatest medicine of all is simply finding someone brave enough to listen to the truth. While this specific narrative is an original work of fiction created for emotional resonance and entertainment, it reflects the very real and often misunderstood struggles of functional neurological disorder, FND, and the power of psychological healing. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. If you believe that true healing begins with a kind heart, type the word HEAL in the comments below. We love reading your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that touch the soul. See you in the next video.